I spend years of my life without the phone ever ringing.
Oh, how nice.
And now it's like, the book is out, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Remind me to give you a book before you
Oh,
bail.
yeah, I want to see your book. How is it being received? Are you getting
I
good
have
reviews?
no clue. The pub date is August 15th or
Okay.
whatever, so it's not.
Okay.
It's not, and I do a signing on Saturday at Ricky's store.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. I should come to that.
Yeah.
Tell us about your grandfather.
My grandfather was named John Treadwell Nichols, and I am named for him. I am John Treadwell Nichols II, the second. My grandfather was the curator of, he was the curator of recent fishes at the American Museum of Natural History from about 1918 to when he died. He died in 1958. He was a very tall, taciturn man who smoked a pipe all the time. He was described as being Lincoln-esque because he was so tall. He wore the same suit, a blue serge suit from Brooks Brothers, every day of his life. Every now and then he would have a new one made, but he always looked sort of rumpled, and he had pipe tobacco crumbs all over his sleeves. And he was a very respected naturalist. He wrote thousands of articles that you could probably find on the internet now. Many, many more writings by John Treadwell Nichols than by John Treadwell Nichols II. That would be me.
And did he have a big influence on how you became interested in?
He was a noted naturalist, and all my connection to him when I was a kid was out in the world, in nature. He was a great ornithologist. I used to help him trap birds and band them. He did a lot of banding of birds, small birds and stuff.
How old were you then?
Oh, I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
And where were you?
I was on Long Island, outside of New York City, and my grandfather lived in Garden City, but the family had an estate on the south shore of Long Island between Patchogue and Santa Mauritius, called the William Floyd Estate, which was 600 acres of land, with hardwood forests, pine forests, salt meadows, lots of fields of rye and things like that. And it was nature paradise.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I would hunt for turtles for my grandfather. He kept records of all the box turtles found on the mastic, the William Floyd Estate, and he marked them underneath on the, not the carapace, what's it called, the underpart of a turtle? No, the carapace is on top, and it's called the proscenium or the promium or something underneath, but don't quote me.
I won't.
And so that was very exciting when we were kids, me and my cousins. We'd just go out and go all through the forests at Mastic looking for box turtles. And you'd find one sometimes that had been marked by somebody in 1910, you know, and you would be finding it in 1945. And in 1960s, I remember finding several turtles at the Mastic Estate that had been marked by my dad when my dad was 6 years old in 1921 or 22, because turtles live a long time. And my grandfather kept records of all the birds, you know, on the estate, and I would go for walks with him, and he would tell me that's a towhee, and that's a red-eyed vireo, and this is an ovenbird, and this is you know, a wood thrush or whatever. He always give me the Latin name. And my father was the same way. My father, David Nichols, wanted to follow in the footsteps of John Treadwell Nichols. My father wanted to be a zoologist, a field zoologist. He did a lot of work for the American Museum of Natural History, collecting small mammals and for the museum. So my grandfather was a huge influence on my dad, and he was also a huge influence on me.
So did you spend a lot of time at the museum?
I visited the American Museum of Natural History a number of times when I was a kid. I'd go to my grandfather's office, and the office was lined with like pickled fishes and frogs and snakes on all the shelves and everything. And it was a great place to visit. It was complete, just like my house here. It was just cluttered with, you know, papers and this and that sort of thing. And I had the run of the museum when I was a little kid. I mean, I would just go off looking at the dinosaurs or looking at the dioramas, you know, of Native Americans or whatever. And so that was fun to be a kid. That was a magical place to be in. And my grandfather was, you know, highly respected. Mother was Monique Robert, French woman, was very interested in anthropology. And she had a connection through marriage to the family of H.P. Davison, Henry Pomeroy Davison, who was a co-partner of J.P. Morgan in the teens and 20s. And Henry Pomeroy Davison's son, Truby Davison, became the president of the American Museum of Natural History. And he got my mother a sinecure at the museum in the Department of Anthropology. And my grandfather, John Treadwell Nichols, got my dad, David G. Nichols, a sinecure in the mammalogy department of the American Museum of Natural History. And henceforth, in 1937, the irresistible force met the immovable object, and my parents, Monique and David, got together. They met at the museum, and they worked together at the museum for several months while they were courting. So that's, yes, the American Museum of Natural History is responsible for me, because that's where my father and my mother got together.
That's a great story.
Yeah. My childhood was very chaotic.
Where were you born?
I was born in Berkeley, California on July 23rd, 1940. My mother was French. Her name was Monique Robert Lebras. And she was from Brittany, but had been raised a lot of her childhood in Barcelona, Spain. And she first came to the United States when she was 16 years old, I think in 1931, maybe, yeah. And she and my dad met in 1937. They got married in 1938 in Paris. And they came back to the United States. They went out to Berkeley, California, where both of them were studying at the University of California. And I was born in 1940. I was not planned because they were very poor and they could not afford to have a kid. And at that time, the whole world was falling apart anyway. They got married in 1938. Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. All of my mom's family were made refugees. First of all, my mother was made a refugee from Spain because they were run out of Barcelona in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War, because Barcelona was the headquarters for the Republicans, and they would have shot, you know, my bourgeois grandmother and her family, etc. And then they went to France and were made refugees when Hitler invaded. And so it was a very chaotic time for everybody in my family trying to escape from Europe in 1940 and 41, etc. And when I was born, my dad had to quit school. My mom took care of me. And then my dad got a job with Pan American Airways. And we moved from Berkeley, California in 1941 to New York City. And then we moved immediately from New York City to Miami, Florida in 1942. And my dad went to Florida first to find an apartment and a little house. And then my mom and I trailed afterwards. And we got to Miami on, I think, July 8th, 1942. And my mom got sick with endocarditis on July 21st, went into the hospital, and she was dead in 2 weeks. So she died on August 4th, 1942, and she was 27 years old. She was still a French citizen, registered as an alien.
No memories.
So I have literally no memories of being with Monique, with my mother. And my father fell apart. And
what was his profession?
he was working for Pan American Airways as a consultant for building airfields in the Caribbean. In fact, he went down to French Guiana. My father spoke fluent French and fluent Russian, which he learned when he was very young. His desire in life was to be a zoologist, a field zoologist, field mammologist, as a field zoologist for the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And he did collecting of small mammals in England, all over New England in the United States, down the southeastern seaboard into Florida. He spent 6 months or 7 months, when he was 18 or 19 years old, collecting near Pyramid Lake. He was on horseback every day for 6 months, running like 250 trap lines, and making museum specimens of voles and chipmunks and, and the other, and bats that he captured. And then he spent about 6 or 7 months in Alaska. He had his 21st birthday in the middle of nowhere outside of Cantwell, Alaska, which is pretty near Denali. And I still have his journals, his collecting journals, and all the drawings, because when you're collecting small mammals, you put down all the information, then you draw the skin and everything, which is part of the information that you can still find in the American Museum of Natural History. There's still drawers of lemmings that you can look at in New York City that my dad collected when he was 21 years old in Alaska. When my mom died in 1942, my father sent me to live with his sister, Molly Weld, on Long Island outside of New York City. And that was really cool because I got to live with my cousins. I had 3 cousins, Tim, Dave, and Nan Weld, who were all sort of my age. And I lived with them for 3 years during the war. My dad joined the Marines, and he wound up in the South Pacific in Bougainville. And then he wound up in the Philippines. And then when the war ended, he spent about 6 months in China repatriating Japanese soldiers from China and also trying to infiltrate Soviet army people in China, because my father spoke fluent Russian and he was an intelligence officer with the Marines. And despite the fact that the Soviet Union had been cohorts of the United States and Britain, of the Allied powers during the Second War, the minute the war was over, the minute those bombs dropped, the Cold War was beginning. The United States was pulling away from communist state. Somewhere in there in 1944, my dad got remarried to a woman from Montpelier, Vermont. And so one day I was living with my cousins, the Welds, who had a wonderful house on Long Island with a great big lake below the house and barns and haystacks and gardens and lawns and all this stuff. The Welds had a lot of money. My uncle, David Weld, was a co-partner of White Weld and Company, a big brokerage firm in New York City. And my littlest cousin, Bill, the smallest Weld, went on to become the governor of Massachusetts. William Weld, Bill Weld. And for a while the Republicans were even considering Bill as a good presidential candidate. But then he advocated legal marijuana and a woman's right to choose, and that screwed him. So, blah, 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 blah. My dad got remarried, and my stepmother came and picked me up one day out of the blue and took me to Montpelier, Vermont when I was 4.5 years old, 5 years old. So then I lived in Vermont and attended kindergarten in Vermont. And then my dad came back from the war, so I kind of got introduced to my father when I was 6 years old. And then he took us down to Long Island, outside of New York City. He tried to work in business. He didn't like it. So then he moved out to Berkeley, California again. We all went out to Berkeley. And so he could finish his undergraduate degree. And he got an undergraduate degree majoring in Slavic languages. Spoke, really good Russian. He learned Russian because as a budding zoologist, he found that the Soviet Union was way ahead of the United States in many of its disciplines in the field of zoology, mammalogy, biology, that kind of thing. So he learned Russian in order to be able to read all the information coming out of the Soviet Union about the particular fields of interest that he wanted to make his life work. So he got his degree in 1951, and the day he got his degree, he graduated, his Marine unit got reactivated for Korea. And my father did not want to go back on the line in Korea. And the government said, you don't have to because you have really valuable skills that we can use in the CIA, in Russian and everything related to knowing the culture and the biology, zoology, linguistics of Russian and the Soviet Union, Russian history, everything. My French grandmother wanted me raised in Europe as a little frog, grenouille. And my dad wanted me raised American in the United States. And my grandmother was a very imperious, aggressive lady. And they came to blows, and basically I was pretty much forbidden to see her or to be connected to my French family while I was growing up. I did visit my grandmother a few times. My father finally cut her off from seeing me. And then when I was older, when I was in high school, prep school, I saw her a few times. But I really didn't get to sort of meet the European side of my family until I was 20 years old, when I went and spent a summer in Europe, staying with my grandmother and beginning to meet all my relatives.
And then somewhere in there you decided to start writing, or
yeah,
where
yeah,
was
yeah.
the example for that, or somebody
Writing? I mean, I grew up in my family was real intellectual. There were books everywhere all the time. My father wrote a lot of scientific stuff. My stepmother was real creative. She always introduced books to us. I was a fanatical little reader when I was growing up. I read just everything. And, all the Hardy Boys stories and Nancy Drew and all the Oz books. There must be 240,000 Oz books, by L. Frank Baum and 30 other ghostwriters, and I read all of them. And I started drawing when I was 4 or 5 years old. I really liked drawing. I loved cartoons, comics, the comic pages in the papers. So I copied all that stuff. I drew a lot. And My dad played music. My dad played the guitar. He's a really good guitar player, and he sang songs, folk songs, ballads, cowboy songs, Russian songs, French songs, all that sort of stuff. And so I was into music. And I have a copy, the first story I wrote in 1955 or 56. When he joined the CIA, he went to Alaska for a year. We went to Connecticut. Then he came back from Alaska. Then we went to rural Virginia. He worked for the CIA in Washington, D.C. They had a terrible marriage, right? You don't want to know about that marriage. Then they got divorced when I was 15. Then I lived with my dad. He got custody of me. Thank God. Because the question would have been, how did you feel when your stepmother hit you with a frying pan? And I said, well, how did I feel when my stepmother hit me with a frying pan? Well, And the summer of the divorce, when I was 15, turning 16, I was alone a lot in his apartment, and I wrote a bunch of short stories in the mode of Damon Runyon. I don't know if you know Damon Runyon, but he does gangster stories, they're first-person gangster stories set in New York City. Like I'm sitting in Mindy's restaurant on a Saturday night having my gefilte fish when who comes through the door but Harry the horse. He's packing a pizzola the size of the Empire State Building. I can see there's trouble ahead, so I outs with my own Betsy, and practically tattoos my monogram across his chest, leaving him exceptionally deceased indeed. I mean, I loved that stuff. And that's the style I wrote in. And from that moment on, I just wrote. I wrote. I drew cartoons. I got a guitar. I put it in tune. I started rocking and rolling soon. The title of this speech is My Life in Music, or Yearning to be Irreverent. My life in music began when I was only knee-high to a kazoo. My mother was French, and during the first 2 years of my life, she sang me to sleep with a lovely lullaby called Fée Dodo. My mother died in 1942 when I was 2 years old, but later my French grandmother taught me the words to Fée Dodo, and I sang my own kids to sleep with that song almost until they were in their teens. It goes, Fée Dodo, Tanya, petite sœur, Fée Dodo, t'auras un gâteau. My father played the guitar with a great deal of vigor, and he often sang me to sleep when I was a kid with songs like The Blue-Tailed Fly, the Crawdad song, Frankie and Johnny. Sometimes he sang ponderous and exciting Russian songs to me, or French ballads that he learned from my mother before he died. My favorite song was Les Filles de Saint-Malo. Lorsque les marins bretons s'en vont dans les voiles, ils chantent tous aux étoiles et gaiement cette chanson. Les filles de Saint-Malo ont les yeux couleur de l'eau. In 1947, when we lived in Westbury, New York, and I was 7 years old, for Christmas I got a Tex Ritter record. I really loved that record. It had songs on it like Old Shep and Roly Poly, Daddy's Little Fatty, and Oh Me, Oh My Miss Molly, and a Woody Guthrie song called Oklahoma Hills. I learned all those songs and much later adapted the Elvis Presley version of Old Shep on my guitar, and I used it to seduce girls. It worked every time. You sing to teenage girls about your best pal, your dog named Old Shep, who finally gets so old that you have to put him out of his misery with your 6-gun, and Old Shep looks up at you with baleful eyes, saying he understands. And then the last lines of the song are, Old Shep is gone, where the good doggies go. No more on this earth will he roam. But if dogs have a heaven, there's one thing I know. Old Shep has a wonderful home. One of the greatest influences on my life was when rock and roll hit in 1955. Maybe Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock, See You Later, Alligator. And then, of course, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Carl Perkins, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. And, I mean, I could not stop, playing music, writing songs, wrote a lot of songs and that kind of stuff. So it's just something that pretty much from the, from the age of 6 or 7. I mean, I was just expressing myself in the arts, as they say. I went to a prep school in Connecticut, Loomis School. I wrote my first novel while I was in prep school. It was called The Journey, and it was set in the Southwest and based on a summer that I spent in the Southwest visiting Taos and working at a research station in Portal, Arizona, and fighting forest fires in the Chiricahua Mountains and of southeastern Arizona. And so my short story had, you know, Chicanos and Native Americans and the mountains and all the Southwest in it. Yeah, I just took a bus out to Albuquerque and got a hotel room for $1.50 or 50 cents or something. Bought myself a pair of knee-high mule deer boots and a switchblade knife. And then came up to Taos and spent a week working for Justin Locke, a guy who lived in Llano Quemado, who became a dear friend of mine when I moved here. I had a letter of introduction to Justin from a farmer I worked for in Virginia who was Justin's brother. And
so that's how you got to Taos.
That's the first time I came to Taos.
You must have liked it.
I liked it. It was cool. What I liked especially was everybody spoke Spanish. I had a real lust for Spanish. And it's interesting because my mother had been whitewashed out of my life after she died, you know. And so it really wasn't until late in my teenage years that I began to sort of get curious or get the guts to be curious about my French family, my French mother, and the fact that my grandmother lived in Barcelona, that my mother had lived in Barcelona, and that Spanish and Spanish culture was hugely influential in their lives, you know. And so yeah, and so the Southwest, the coolest thing about the Southwest is everybody spoke Spanish. And I remember when I was 16 years old in Taos, Justin Locke took me next door to his neighbor's house, and it was the Torres family in Llano Quemado. And, you know, they had one of those evenings where they brought out the fiddle and somebody had an accordion, you know, and they were playing like, you know, polkas and waltzes and varsovianas and stuff like that. And I just loved it. And I remember, too, that they were replastering the Ranchos Church during that week that I was here. And there were all these women on ladders, paradoras. It wasn't guys, it was mostly women. And a lot of them were wearing black, you know, like in Spain or something like that. I don't know if this has been, you know, rememorized in my mind or something like that. But I do recall women on ladders replastering the Ranchos Church. And so that was really cool. And when I went to college, I wrote 1 or 2 novels a year. I wrote hundreds of short stories. I mean, I saved notebook after notebook. I mean, I wrote humor columns for the newspaper. Stupid, gross out humor columns. You know, they were just awful. They were predicated on sort of obscene puns. You know, they were, that I got away with it. I have no reason to understand, you know, because Hamilton College, where I went to school, was, you know, a high academic school. It was like little sister school like Amherst or Williams or whatever. But the crap they allowed me to publish in their newspaper was really stunning and very embarrassing too, you know. But the students loved it.
And you majored in?
Well, I majored in English, you know, literature. And like I said, I wrote 1 or 2 novels a year. Instead of going to the bars on Saturday night, I would just write. I loved writing. And when I got out of college in 1962, I went to Spain. I avoided the draft because I had severed the ACLs in both my knees playing hockey. I was co-captain of the hockey team my senior year in college. When I went to college, I didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to be a hockey player. I really, 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 really wanted to play hockey. And I got crippled in my junior year, and that was a big blow. But it was a great impetus to my writing career because it got me out of the Army at a time when the U.S. was beginning to crank up in Southeast Asia, you know, and more related to Laos and Cambodia than Vietnam. But it was going to happen really soon, the Vietnam War. So instead of being in the Army, I was 4F, and I went to Spain for a year, Barcelona, and I taught Spanish at the American Institute in Barcelona. Lived with my grandmother, who gave me a room in her apartment, and wrote another novel. And that one was called The Sterile Cuckoo. And I came back from Spain in 1963, got myself a little apartment below Greenwich Village, and started taking my novel around to publishers, just leaving it at the front desk. And about the 8th or 9th publisher that read it bought it, you know. And so I sold my first novel when I was 23, and it actually became a popular book. I mean, when I was 20, it was published when I was 24. It became a Literary Guild alternate. It went out on film option instantly to Alan Pakula. Pakula hired me to write the screenplay, you know. It was, it got bought by paperbacks. Avon Paperbacks paid $37,000.
Did you write the screenplay?
I did. I wrote several drafts of the screenplay, and then Pakula hired a guy named Alvin Sargent to do other drafts, and Sargent wound up getting the credit for the screenplay.
How did you learn how to write a screenplay?
Pakula just said, write it. And I said, I don't even know. I said, can you give me a hint about the structure of the screenplay, you know? And Pakula had been a producer for years, and his director was a guy named Robert Mulligan, and they had done the film of To Kill a Mockingbird with Gregory Peck. And Pakula said after he did To Kill a Mockingbird, he said every script submitted to him had a bird's name in the title, right? So that's why somebody sent him The Sterile Cuckoo. And but anyway, Pakula said, if you want to learn about screenwriting, he said, there's a published version of Horton Foote's script for To Kill a Mockingbird. He said, go buy it and read it, and that'll teach you screenplay style. So that was my entire lesson in how to write screenplays. And I bought it and read it, you know, and I had read the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. And what amazes you is that the screenplay is so spare, you know, compared to this rich novel. The screenplay is just 100 pages and most of it's air. So,
did they use your screenplay?
No, they used some scenes,
Okay.
you know, but not enough to give me a credit, or I didn't even have any clue, you know, how all that worked. And no, I had no idea what I was doing. I said, why would you hire me to write a script? And he said, because you have a lot of energy, because you're the author of the book, and because in discussing this, I'm going to learn a lot about this story and how I want to tell it, you know, and how you tell it. And when I went to work with Pakula, it was really cool to have that be my first Hollywood experience, because at the same time Otto Preminger tried to hire me to be in his stable of writers. And meeting Otto Preminger in New York City in the huge office with the lamb's wool rugs on the floor and the Picassos on the wall, you know, and all that crap, would have been enough to disillusion me totally, because it was so into sort of the Hollywood cliche of sort of power and money and that stuff. Pakula, on the other hand, I mean, we worked in Quonset huts that didn't have any air conditioning. They were just fans going, and people worked from 8 in the morning until midnight, you know. And all our sessions, our so-called story conferences, to me they were like, you know, human relativity sessions. I mean, basically we sat around and talked about our lives and our childhoods and our first loves and our teenage years, and I don't know, going to therapy sessions with Freud, you know, only it was Alan Pakula, you know. And I really got to like, he was really a nice guy, you know. And I really had fun, and he sort of included me in everything, and was a real sweet man. And The Sterile Cuckoo was the first movie that he ever directed, which is kind of interesting, that he had some kind of personal connection to this little first love story, you know. And I think he probably felt it was simple enough for him to begin with, you know.
So somewhere in there you met Ruby.
Yeah. Because Ruby had a roommate who was going out with a guy named Mike Taylor, who had gone to prep school with me, and it was his dad that was the head of Avon Books, who purchased the rights to the paperback Sterile Cuckoo. And so my publisher wanted me to be nice to his son Mike, so it wouldn't screw up the deal with his dad, you know, Frank Taylor, who was a real mover and shaker and had been a movie producer who's most famous for producing The Misfits with Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, and Montgomery Clift. So his son, Mike, kept wanting to go out with me, and I said, okay. And finally, we went out to dinner one night, and his girlfriend asked her roommates to draw straws for somebody that could come out with me too. And Ruby lost and had to come out with me. That's the way we met. We got married in New York in 1965. Uh-huh. And we stayed in New York till 1969. Luke was born, my son. Our son was born in New York City, 1966. Then we moved to Taos in 1969. And then Tanya was born in 1970. And so...
You bought a house on Ranchitos Road.
We did. We came to Taos, and it's really funny. I came out to Taos in May of 1969. Okay, in Taos, I came to Taos in 1969. The first day I arrived here, there were bullet holes in store windows. Things were boarded up. There was a hippie Chicano war going on. I remember I was driving around the plaza. I saw a kid that looked like he needed a ride. He said, I stopped my VW bus and picked him up, and he said, I'm going to the 5-Star Farm. And I drove him down to Llano Camado to the hot springs. And the next thing I know, I was floating around in the hot springs, totally naked with 35 or 40 freaks. And then they asked me to dinner, and they were all squatting around a big cauldron full of stew or something and eating it with their hands. And then they asked me to stay because they were having what amounted, as far as I could tell, a kind of communal fuckathon that night. And I was married and I had a kid, so I declined. I demurred. I remember fleeing from the 5-Star Farm down in Hot Springs. I was so grateful to hit the hay in the El Chico motor court for $2 a night. I had a friend. My first friend in Taos was a guy named Justin Locke who lived in Llano Camado, and Justin was very much into the hippie movement. And I remember one day he took me up to New Buffalo when they were building the commune there,
and they were serving lunch, and again, it was some kind of stew in a pot that was laced with blotter acid or something like that. And I was the only person who refused to eat the stew. But that is another connection to the hippie movement. I met Dennis Hopper almost as soon as I got to Taos. And Dennis was a little deranged, and I remember he had a friend, Dean Stockwell, who was coming to town, and Dean was at that time with an actress named Toni Basil. Toni Basil, I think, plays one of the hookers in Easy Rider in the movie. And for some reason, they couldn't stay with Dennis, so they stayed in my house. Dean Stockwell and Toni Basil slept for 2 or 3 or 4 days on my kitchen floor in sleeping bags. And I remember for pillows that they had a garbage sack full of marijuana.
But then Ruby flew out, you know, and we went around Taos with a realtor, and we looked at about 7 houses and said, all right, we'll get the cheapest one. You know, we didn't have very much money, and the houses didn't cost very much money, but there was a house on Upper Ranchitos Road, which was 1.7 acres of land with 2 irrigation ditches going through it, and cost $14,000. And, you know, we just did it on a handshake. At the end of the week, you know, we spent 5 days or 6 days, said, okay, this one, did a handshake, and the realtor said, okay, we'll send you the papers in New York. We went back to New York, and sure enough, the papers arrived, signed them. I assumed a mortgage that the previous person had had on the house. And we arrived in Taos and moved into the house. And the realtor handed me a deed and a couple of other papers. That was it. It was so easy, you know. The house had a roof that leaked like a sieve. It was a dirt roof, you know. It was totally incompetent. Had no septic system that functioned. It turned out you had to crap in the outhouse, you know. It was surrounded by snakes. It was, you know, I mean, it was just a broken down...
In adobe?
Old adobe, yeah. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was just on the brink of total collapse. But it was so easy to just find it, move in, put the milk in the irrigation ditch because we couldn't afford a refrigerator, you know. And then just try and start learning how to take care of it and patch the roof and do this and do that and learn how to irrigate the pasture and clean the ditch. And it was great for me because all my neighbors were Spanish speaking, you know. It was, so when I cleaned the ditch, I was the only gabacho on the ditch. But, you know, I could joke and listen to jokes and that. And half the meetings I went to were all conducted in Spanish. So I was in heaven, you know. It was just, I mean, I loved just the community, the attitude, the culture, all that kind of stuff. And I was still, when I moved to Taos, I was still making a living. Well, I was still trying to make a living writing when I got to Taos. And I got to Taos I had $8,000, and all of it had to go to the house. And I had published 2 novels, The Sterile Cuckoo and The Wizard of Loneliness. The Sterile Cuckoo had been popular. The Wizard of Loneliness sank like a stone. And then I got really politicized. I mean, I moved to Taos not to be part of a generation of alternate lifestyle people. I moved to Taos because I wanted to continue working within the movement, the anti-war movement, the Black Panther movement, the social equality and justice movement, the civil rights movement. And I had read an awful lot about New Mexico. You know, New Mexico at that point was and still is just about the poorest state in the Union, you know. It was, I figured, as close as I could come to a third world experience while still being in the United States. I'd read an awful lot about Reyes Tijerina and the Alianza and the land grant movement. that had wound up in the raid on the Tierra Maria courthouse and that kind of stuff. I had introductions to Elizabeth Martinez, Petita Martinez, and people in Española who were putting out El Grito del Norte, a newspaper that was like Alianza newspaper, Pinto newspaper, and stuff like that, you know, a Chicano movement paper. And immediately when I got to Taos, gravitated to going down there and helping them get out issues of the newspaper. I joined groups like Trabajadores de la Raza, which was in Taos agitating for Hispanic social, economic justice issues. Got involved in the Blue Lake. The Taos Pueblo was struggling very hard to get its Blue Lake back. And things were very tense. And things were tense over the Blue Lake struggle because many people did not want the Pueblo to get the Blue Lake land back, figuring that then every native tribe in the United States would demand its land back, you know. And there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of people burning Forest Service signs. The Peñasco Forest Service headquarters got dynamited, blown to bits. There was an enormous amount of tension in Taos. But anyway, I was real aware of sort of the politics, the economics, the class structure of New Mexico before I ever got here, and was really interested in continuing activities that I've been working on in New York with Nuevo Mexicanos, and was just shocked down on my jockstrap when I got to Taos, and there were all the hippies, all the freaks, all the alternate lifestyle, all the migration of people starting communes like New Buffalo and Reality and Morning Star and the Five Star Farm and the Hog Farm in Peñasco and all that stuff. And I avoided that like the plague. It's really interesting.
Sort of, but you did have some people sleeping on your floor.
I had, yeah, but most of the people that wound up sleeping on my floor were political people.
Right.
They weren't freaks or hippies or summer of love people. They were commies, socialists, anarchists, whatever, you know, or some aspect of movement people.
And out of this came your next novel.
Yeah, well, when I moved to New Mexico, I also started working for a muckraking journal in Santa Fe called the New Mexico Review, and did a lot of articles over a 3-year period. I wrote the Milagro Beanfield War between 1972 and 1973. I had failed to publish a book now for about 7 or 8 years. I had been trying to write political novels, angry political novels, particularly anti-war novels, anti-Vietnam War during that period. And finally I said, I'm getting nowhere doing this, so I tried to kick back and reintroduce a sense of humor to my life, because I kind of lost my sense of humor a little bit, a lot. And so Milagro was a strange experience. I had been writing articles for a couple of years on the struggle to introduce a conservancy district and build a dam in the Taos area, and or defeat the conservancy district and the dam. And I had been working for a couple of years with a group called the Tres Rios Association, which was headed by a good friend of mine, Andres Martinez, and other guys whom I really loved, like Polito Valerio and Bernabe Chavez, J.J. Bernal, and these elderly guys who were real instrumental in sticking up for just the culture and the way of life in Taos. And they had a lot of courage because they were essentially defeating a big dam and a lot of water. And it's hard to say no to water in northern New Mexico, you know. But they figured the cost would be totally prohibitive. to most of the local population. So anyway, I did a bunch of articles which required a lot of research into just the history of conservancy districts in the Rio Grande corridor, etc. And so when the New Mexico Review died, ignominiously, in November of 1972, I said, okay, let's try another novel, you know. And so I blammed out the Milagro Beanfield War in about 5 or 6 weeks, and took about 3 or 4 weeks to retype the book, sent it to an agent in New York City, and the agent sold it. And which was the first book I'd sold in 8 years or something like that. And then the publisher they only gave me like about 8 or 9 months to rewrite the book 5 or 6 times. I mean, I just frantically worked on that book after I'd sold it, because I hadn't really thought, one, that I would sell it, or two, that then the publisher would say, we want to publish it, you know, within a specific amount of time.
And you were out there in that shed working? That was your...
Yeah, well, actually, I was working in my kitchen table, because at that point, I'd gotten separated. Ruby and I got separated.
Oh.
And she was living in Albuquerque. She went down there to go back to school, and so we had a kind of commuter experience going. And so I didn't have a car, I remember. I didn't have a vehicle. She had the car. So I would hitchhike everywhere.
And bicycle.
And bicycle, yeah. And so anyway, so lucky me, you know, it's just on the edge of the cliff, you know, about to fall off. I got really lucky and sold the book. You know, they gave me 10 grand advance, which is not a whole lot of money, but to me it was a whole lot of money. And the book came out and wasn't particularly successful. It didn't sell very many copies. It got a lot of reviews, but was too quirky or whatever, and died. But it went out on film option. Mm-hmm. It went out on film option, even before it was published. And that film option kept me alive. Film option means producers, guys named Bob Christensen and Rick Rosenberg, who had gotten fairly famous making a movie called The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, which got Cicely Tyson an Emmy or something like that. They were interested. They were seriously interested. So they were paying for the option and tried to make it into a film. And they hired Mark Medoff, a playwright down in Las Cruces, got famous for When You Coming Back, Red Ryder. Mark Medoff failed at it, and then they hired Tracy Keenan Wynn to do a script, and then they hired Michael Wadley, the guy who did the Woodstock movie, and then they hired Leonard Gardner, a guy who had done a film for John Huston on one of his own novels called Fat City. So there was a lot of people working to make that into a movie from the minute it went out on film option in 1973. And in 1979, they gave up, and at that point, the book had sort of become a cult book, cult novel. What do they call it? Underground cult book or something like that. It's like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or even Cowgirls Get the Blues, I don't know, something like that. So there was more interest, and when the option was given up, like Redford was interested, Cheech Marin was interested, a couple of other Hollywood people were interested, and this guy Moctezuma Esparza was interested. Esparza had nothing except, he was Chicano, he was Latino, he was Hispanic, he came from the hood, he spoke Spanish, he'd been in the movement, and So I figured it would be cool if he would, take the option. And the agent just said, "You're out of your mind, John. What are you talking about? You will make so much money with Robert Redford. You will make money with Cheech Marin. You will make money." I remember there was a consortium of realtors in Albuquerque who wanted the option, but who had money. They had money, And by that time in my life, the only thing I trusted was lack of money, So long story short is I gave the option to Moctezuma Esparza, and he got that I helped him, write a grant to get funding from the National Endowment of the Humanities to make a small film for public television, right? And that's the way we went. And Esparza hired me to write it because I was the only so-called writer that he could find willing to work for scale, minimum, Writers Guild minimum. And I spent the next 2.5 years writing about 6 or 7 drafts of the script for a total of $20,000. And I remember Redford came to Taos and could not believe that I had I wouldn't give him the option, right? So he went to Esparza and talked to Esparza, and Esparza said, "Oh my God, here's my stepping stone into the big time." So he signed a joint venture agreement with Redford. But Esparza was always the producer of record and they just kept, no, they didn't keep paying option payments. What happened when Redford finally came into the project is he said to Esparza, Mocte, he said, "Are you paying him option? What do you pay for the option?" And Mocte said, "I don't know, I think it was $4,000, right?" And Redford said, "Well, why pay him anymore? Let's just buy it. It's so cheap." Because I'd set up the deal through the National Endowment of the Humanities to make a little tiny film for public TV, and in order to get the grant, the purchase price had to be almost zero, So Redford just reached in his pocket, we'll buy the book, right? And they bought it, I think, for $30,000. That was the purchase price. And then they owned it, And they hired another guy. They hired David Ward to work on the screenplay. And I remember that I'd worked for about 2.5 years for $20,000, and I think I heard that David Ward, who wrote The Sting for Redford, right? He was in another universe from me when it came to screenwriting. I think that his first draft he got paid $400,000, right? Something like that. And anyway, he did a bunch of drafts, and then they came back to me and asked me to rewrite all the drafts that David Ward had done, rewriting my drafts that I had been doing. And for some reason, a really, really odd reason, Redford decided to make the movie. I do not understand why. I never understood the script, never seemed to be a really good script, and there was so much chaos and confusion around the whole process. And it had been going on for 14 years, 13 or 14 years by now,
What was Redford like?
He was cool. But he was very distracted. He was a very busy man, And it was very difficult to get time to speak with him about the project. And when he first came into the picture was when he was starting up Sundance, the Independent Film Institute. And he invited me to come to Sundance, to the first Sundance Institute, so that we could work on the Milagro Beanfield War, so that he could explain how he felt about it. And so I said, "Great, I'll do that." And then the Writers Guild went out on strike. So I said, "I can't talk to you about the movie. We can't work on the movie." And he said, "Well, come to Sundance anyway. You know, while I was at Sundance, he says, "You want to go have a taco?" And I said, I can't eat tacos. That would be a corruption of the guild contract, you know. And I wouldn't talk, you know. And that was the last time that I had access to Robert Redford for a month. And after that, it was just catch as can catch, you know, a day here, a couple of days there. And then I was dropped from the picture, and then because the script was so shaky, I was brought back in 1986 for another rewrite. And then they decided to make the movie. God knows why. You know?
And it was filmed here in
It was filmed
Truchas.
in New Mexico. A lot of it was filmed in Truchas over by Los Alamos. They had a sound stage in Santa Fe.
Did you ever go see it?
I didn't see
Is
much
that-
of it. I didn't. At the time, I had just gotten remarried. I was in a second marriage. And I was working on God knows how many projects. I was working on American Blood novel. I was working on nonfiction book on the Mesa, nonfiction book of Fragile Beauty. I was working on a CBS miniseries on the life of Pancho Villa, you know, working on 3 films at once. And I simply did not have time to go dawdle around on the set. I mean, I think I went 3 times during the entire filming, that's all. I just couldn't do it. Plus I figured, you know, leave them alone.
Were you happy with the results?
Sure. I always desperately wrote the stories, sort of trying to earn a living, but I never wrote the stories that you would gear up to write in order to deliberately earn a living. How I earned a living for, 20 years is working on films, not literature. And when I worked on movies, it was completely different. I mean, I never wrote a screenplay on spec. Every job that I took, I was paid to do. Every job fell out of the blue. I never looked for a job in movies. It's just that people kept calling up and saying, "Are you available? Would you like to work on? Can you do this?" And it always amazed me that people wanted to hire somebody who wasn't a screenwriter, and Hollywood paid money.
So you've worked with some famous people. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Costa Gavras.
Well, I worked, okay, by default, I finally got hired to work on Milagro Beanfield War, right? Because I was the cheapest guy around. And that landed me in dealing with Robert Redford, right? So that was fun, And then one day I got a phone call, about that time I got a phone call out of the blue from a producer asking me to work with Costa Gavras, come to Los Angeles and talk with Costa Gavras about rewriting a script for a film that he was working on. And I went out there, and that was truly an accident that gave me a film career, because I got along with Costa. And the film that I rewrote was called Missing. Missing starred Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek and John Shea and Melanie Myron, and it got 4 Academy Award nominations, and it wound up winning for Best Adapted Screenplay. And subsequently I worked with Costa for 5 years on 2 more movies that never got made. I worked with Louis Malle on a film version of one of my own novels, The Magic Journey. He was a great director. And we worked on a movie together for a year and a half about Haitian refugees and immigration policies under the Reagan administration. I worked with Ridley Scott on a couple of movies. All these movies never got made. Missing got made, Milagro Beanfield War got made, The Sterile Cuckoo and the Wizard of Loneliness got made, and I worked on all of them, but basically the movies I earned a living on for writing never got made.
So you spent a lot of time in Hollywood?
No. I don't like Hollywood. I don't like Los Angeles. No, I had no interest in being a part of Hollywood. You know, the projects were interesting. Each project was almost like a college education for all the research and for all the things that I learned working on the projects. But I didn't want to spend time in Hollywood. I certainly didn't want to live there. And I made clear in any contracts that I did all my work in Taos. So I steered clear of Hollywood and still kind of on the very edge of it, got to nibble at the cookies, you know. But I wasn't willing to make the effort to do the networking and the schmoozing, or just to develop relationships that would have given me more of a career in movies, you know, because I didn't really want the career in movies. And I was embarrassed by the money. The money was, it was at the bottom of the industry, but I figured it out. At the end, it came out to about 40 grand a year for 17 years or something. You know, it was a decent living. For me, a really good living. And consequently, I tried to get rid of the money immediately. You know, I didn't put it by, I didn't save it. I got married and divorced a couple of times, which cost me any money I had in the bank, then, you know, down the proverbial drain. Even lost a house. You know, I lost my original house in a divorce. But, you know, it's easy come, easy go. And nevertheless, it was interesting. I had fun working on the very edge of the film industry with the people that I got to work with. And but I never got involved in the community or in the culture of Hollywood. That didn't interest me. What interested me was, you know, hunting and fishing and hiking and wandering the mesa with a camera and sitting at little stock ponds in the evening and just watching the killdeer and the teal and the geese and the ibises come in and go out. You know, I was very lucky to be able to sort of have that alternate career without it disturbing at all my routine in Taos. And my routine in Taos has always been to work 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 40 or 50 years. You know, I mean, I work every night. But every day, you know, I could wake up at 1 in the afternoon or 2 in the afternoon, go over to the high bridge and go down Rope Trail and fish this marvelous water for trout, you know, until dark, climb out of the gorge, you know, drive home, eating a sandwich and drinking a beer, you know, lie down for 20 minutes, get up and start typing, you know, and then do my business. And I've been able to mix sort of business and vacation on almost a daily basis for the last 41 years.
And what about the state of our planet and global warming? Since
The global warming is a fact of life. Climate change is happening much more rapidly than people thought it was going to happen. We're in a serious denial of the fact that we are basically destroying the biology that sustains us in every way, shape, and form. I feel terrifically sorry for the generations that are going to follow me, because the world that they live in is going to be very different and very difficult. Right now we're locked in an economic turndown or slowdown, but the solutions that everyone is seeking, from the American government and economic system to the European government and economic system to every place else on earth, i.e. to get back to a state of the economy where there's constant growth and constant creation of new jobs through new productivity, etc., is a formula for planetary suicide. And as long as we are on that path, we're going to create an extraordinary, hell on earth. And the fact of the matter is that life for, half of the Earth's population or more is already hell on earth. And the rich countries on the planet, which is us, Japan, and Europe, basically, are going to be the last to undergo this horrid transformation that has already happened in eastern Congo and Somalia and Kenya and Sudan and Chad and Liberia, etc. You can pick up the most recent New Yorker and read a long article by John Lee Anderson on what's going on in North Sudan, South Sudan, and the Nuba Mountains, right? And you read that and you realize that this huge area of land with people on it is a complete environmental, political, economic, cultural disaster. And that is a fact of life in most countries, from Cambodia to Bolivia to Zimbabwe, Namibia, etc. He doesn't have much faith. He doesn't think that the thing is going to turn around, given the way humanity seems to be responding to the crisis. But he believes it's extraordinarily important to keep fighting against it and to keep trying to articulate the problem in hopes that at some point something will stick. And I'm not sure that I see solutions to the problems without the problems first becoming utter disasters. And then people start to rebuild. And humanity is capable of solving things and rebuilding. We have the capacity to find solutions, but usually it requires some devastating collapse before we act.
Is climate change human caused?
I think all the evidence says, yeah. I do understand that there have been 4 or 5 major extinction periods on the Earth, and that they were caused by natural phenomena. The last one, I think, was the Ice Age, which is fairly recent, right? They're 20,000 years ago. I have read a number of times that, 95% of all the species that have gone extinct on the planet went extinct prior to the advent of humanity and human-caused, problems. So one could look at sort of the scourge of humanity as one more natural disaster. In terms of a cosmic overview, what we're doing to the planet is just a little blip, and the planet will readjust. Whatever survives, whatever life form survives, will readjust and flourish again until the sun flares up before it dies out and fries everything. And when you look at the universe, when you start thinking about galaxies and stars and black holes and red giants and white dwarfs or whatever, it's all fairly meaningless, and wonderful.
But what
It's
do you say?
extraordinary.
What do you say to your children?
What do I say to my children?
What do you say to your grandchildren?
You say, you say, do the best you can. You try and berate them, for getting too involved in cell phones and the technology, the lunatic technology of texting and Facebook and this and that and one thing and another. Their world is going to be very different. You hope that people will try and figure out how to survive the way we tried to figure out how to survive. A population problem. Now, are we going to segue into Malthusian disaster or not? Looks to me like that's one of the things that's going to happen. That Malthus will finally be, recognized as a prophet. Because I don't think you can just keep having green revolutions and genetically modified foods to continue feeding, 8 billion people, 9 billion people, 10 billion people. At a certain point, the resource will simply collapse. Mm. You just can't put fertilizer down forever, You just can't poison the world you live in and expect it to continue having a productivity that will feed the amount of mouths that is created by the continued productivity.
So what's the responsibility of our generation?
Our generation has sort of abdicated most of its responsibility. We have many, many voices. We have learned a technology that can be an anti-technology. We certainly, we have strong ideas about sustainability and how to bring that about and how to seek alternate forms of energy, etc. We haven't done a whole lot of work on learning how to control human behavior. The responsibility is for the voices of so-called reason to keep trying to be the voices of reason. And I'm not quite sure, what else to say without. I just, every day I go into Taos, to get my mail at the post office. And I'm horrified, and what horrifies me more than anything is just automobiles. Mm. I'm just horrified by the cars that come and park at the post office, that park at Smith's, the enormous, big, huge, monstrous SUVs and pickup trucks. And I just think I'm just looking at the Holocaust. I look at the Smith's parking lot, and it's kind of like looking at Auschwitz when it was liberated, because all I can see is the destruction caused by such luxurious overproduction and the fact that everyone buys into it. When I first got to Taos, I guess I learned how to fish the little rivers. Pot Creek, Rio Chiquita, the Little Rio Grande, southeast of town. And I was obsessed by it. I just ran up those little rivers just on a daily basis, literally. And did that for about 10 years. And then I got obsessed by the Rio Grande River. First of all, I learned how to fish the Rio Grande.
Look at that. Yipes. Wow. Look at that.
That's a big fish.
That is beautiful.
You got a snapshot of that? Or you have your camera?
Yeah. Let me take this wait a minute. I can put it on photo and... Okay, it's taken.
Just moving up and down the river from Pilar, you know, Power Line Trail, Francisco Antonio Gutierrez, Sheep Corral, Suicide Slide, Rope Trail, you know, Bajada de la Vibra, Caballo, blah, 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 all the way up to Arsenic, Big Arsenic, you know, Bear Crossing, Hole in the Rock up there, just up and down the Rio Grande Gorge. And then I got obsessed with the western mesas. And I spent years like just observing stock ponds, little puddles of water and the life cycles in stock ponds, taking pictures of them, and just wandering in the mesas and over by Tres Orejas before Star or any place came in. There was nobody out there. I had it all to myself.
You own some land out there, don't you?
I did for a while, yeah, but I never went there. It was south of the Carson Schoolhouse.
What do you see at a stock pond?
What do I see in the stock pond?
What do you see at the stock
Oh,
pond?
you see, first of all, they fill up with spadefoot toads whenever there's rain. The minute there's water, you know, a night comes and you hear, you know, going nuts. And the next day, the ponds are just full of tadpoles. You can scoop them up with your hands. And they evolve from being tadpoles to being adult toads in like about 12 days or 13 days. It's the fastest evolution on Earth, just about, because they're geared to temporary water puddles. But stock ponds are full of insects. So in the evenings, there's just endless swallows and bats and nighthawks just hunting, you know, all over, swooping over the stock pond. Geese land in them, ibises land in them, phalaropes. There's little phalaropes running around, turning in circles. Avocets, they're little metronomes walking around, you know, with their little bills going back and forth. Sanderlings. I've had sanderlings come right up, because you sit there really quietly, and they'll come right up and start pecking crap out of the treads in your sneakers, you know, if you don't move. It's a magical world, you know? And nobody pays attention to it. So I had a wonderful time there, and then, and I used to go camping up at the Latier Lakes and fishing, you know, up by the Colorado border, and go up to Horseshoe Lake on the other side of Wheeler Peak, go up and camp at Williams Lake, go...
You had an experience camping at Heart Lake once.
Yeah,
right?
I used to do that. I'd go up there with my friend Mike Kimmel, and I remember once I went up there in October when there was a lot of snow on the ground and got freaked out because there were bear tracks, like they'd been running the Indianapolis 500 around Heart Lake. That scared me.
What did you do?
No, I just, you know, all I had was a sleeping bag and a frying pan and a spoon, so I put the frying pan with the spoon, you know, you're going to bang away the bears if they happen to bother you. And I remember the next day going over to the Latiers and fishing the fourth Latier, which was all frozen except for one little thing at the inlet or the outlet, catching about 4 trout, you know, eating them. Then I left the mountains early because it was the World Series, and I couldn't stand not knowing who was winning the World Series. And when I turned 60, I went really crazy and started hiking above tree limit. I don't know what happened, because when I turned 60, I thought, okay, enough already with all the physical exercise and staying in shape and all that crap, because I had so many heart problems and stuff. I have a prolapsed mitral valve and asthma. In case things get out of hand, there's an adrenaline needle always ready in my fridge. Never do I forget to carry a Ventolin inhaler. I get tachycardia attacks and bad atrial fib. When I have the tachycardia or AFib attacks, I perform the Valsalva maneuver. You squeeze yourself downward as if constipated and trying to move your bowels, and that stops your heart, then it restarts again in sinus rhythm. I drink a lot of Jack Daniels before my meals and wine with the meals and beer. I seem to have a great capacity. I'm used to my fucked up heart. I've been on and off of heart pills like Digitalis, Digoxin, Tenormin, Quinaglu, Verapamil, Carvedilol, Naloxone, Triamterene, and Lasix since I was 34. I sense that I'm indestructible, and I also sense that I might drop dead tomorrow, but who cares? C'est la vie, carry on. And for some reason, the next obsession in my life became 12 to 13,000 feet. And
What'd you see up there?
you see a lot of air. It's a wonderful universe. There's, first of all, you're in subalpine and alpine territory. The botany is way different than the botany down here in the valley. Alpine flowers and vegetation is pretty special. You see a lot of different migratory birds that you don't see so much down here. Pipits and things like that. Ruby-crowned kinglets, Audubon warblers. You see, I got really interested in bighorn sheep because I forget when they put bighorns in Wheeler. I think about, I forget the exact date, but they haven't been here so long, but they're very successful. So I became obsessed by bighorn sheep, and I always carried a spotting scope, and I read a lot of books, and became friends with the bighorn biologist in New Mexico, and took a lot of photographs, and the most fun in learning about bighorns was simply crawling around in their territory, and it was so wonderful for 10 years to really spend a lot of time up above timberline on the tundra. And I spent most of my time west of Williams Lake. Didn't like going up Wheeler Peak much because it's just people. There's a lot of people.
Didn't you see a bear up there once?
Yeah, there's bears all over. Yeah, I saw a number of bears.
Do you have
But I saw a lot of... Another obsession was getting into grouse hunting. Grouse hunting is... I'm like an existential grouse hunter, right? It's like you hike for 10 hours a day for 1.2 seconds of action, right? And most of the time you don't shoot a grouse, but you bushwhack. Again, the grouse hunting that I've done is all southeast of Taos in 3 watersheds, Pot Creek, Rio Chiquita, and the Little Rio Grande. And I know those watersheds really, really well. In the beginning I traveled with geological survey maps, and then I just had it memorized. But the game trails are the same year after year, decade after decade. The elk use the same path, bears use the same paths, elk use the same wallows, the same ojitos are functioning up there. And that's wonderful. That's another obsession where I've learned so much about the land.
And have you written about that?
Not so much.
How many books have you written?
I've written about 80, but I've published 19. I've written so many books, and I've written so many drafts of books. Endless, just drafts, and books that I published may have gone through 30 or 40 drafts, and the published book has nothing to do with the original drafts. They're totally different stories.
Are you ever going to write about the land and what you learned about it?
I have the material. I mean, a lot of the hiking trips I've taken, not just in the high mountains, but everywhere, I have voluminous field notes. I come home, I write down on envelopes while I'm hiking or talking a little tape recorder. And in the mountains, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of field notes on every hiking expedition I took. I mean, just, they're boring as all get out, but they would be invaluable information, you know, for writing a book, if I choose to write a book. And I took photographs too. I took photographs every trip into the mountains. Is as a recorded photograph, just the scenery, the weather, what I saw, that kind of thing.
You have a book called The Sky's the Limit, right?
Uh-huh. Oh, fancy that you should mention that.
Would you like to read us a quote from it?
Read you a quote. The sky's the limit. Look, Mom, I published a real book. Oh, okay. This will be spontaneous.
Do you want to show us some of your photographs from here?
No, I don't want to show any of the photographs of the book. Sure. Wait. Let me see.
What was the
These-
inspiration for this book?
This book is my Inconvenient Truth.
Okay.
Al Gore did that movie, An Inconvenient Truth. This book is an environmental essay on what we're doing to the planet and what we ought to do to quit doing what we're doing to the planet. And so, let me see. Let's pick a wonderful picture. Well, I don't know. This is a stupid picture of a cow with a white stripe. But on one side of the page is a picture, and on the other side of the page is the text. And the picture is just almost always sky and mesa, sky and mesa. And it's very, what do you call it, bucolic or whatever. And the text is just doomsday ecology, you know, up against the wall humanity or ecological devastation is going to get your mama.
Well, let's hear some of that.
All right. You know, and well, let's see. You want to see another picture first?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me show you. I'll select a couple of pictures. Let's see, it's just, you know, when I say the sky's the limit, essentially, that's what these pictures are. And I love photographs that are just absolutely, here's the, I don't know, they're so cornball, you know. I take and publish all these pictures, and now every time I pick up a magazine, a real estate magazine in Taos, I see these same pictures. It's just people taking the same pictures again and again and again, you know. Taos Mountain, the Mesa, here's a pretty one of a stock pond. I'm also the world's foremost photographer of stock ponds. I've taken more and better photographs of stock ponds than anyone else on earth. But I can't convince anybody to do a book about them. I mean, take a look at that stock pond. Now there's a picture of a stock pond. Nobody else has a picture like that. Okay, read something. Quick. And where was it I had? Oh, first principle of life is that everything is interconnected. Hence, any solutions to our problems we arrive at, which take into consideration only our own families, our own villages, our own states, or our own country, are, by nature, prejudicial against the rest of the world and ineffective in the long run. North America's destiny, more than that of any other place on earth, affects the destinies of everybody. If I admit that the money I pay for my morning coffee is directly connected to the political, economic, and social exploitation of the Colombian peasants who picked the beans that eventually made the Java, then I cannot legitimately consolidate my destiny without taking those peasants' lives equally into account. My concern may seem irrelevant right now. After all, I'm very privileged, and these peasants are nobodies. Yet I assure you, for the world to survive, they need to have rights similar to my own. If they don't get them, my son one day may die in an American Army uniform in a Latin American country, and what will this lavish standard of living mean to me then?
Which of your books do you think is the most important to you?
I mean, I'm not sure any of them are important. It's sort of like all of them are important to me because that's the way I spent my life. It was writing books, and every book was a particular problem that I wanted to sort of solve, or it was a particular story I wanted to try and figure out how to tell it. And the process of doing that kept me alive, put food on the table, and kept me really interested in doing what I was doing. It's really fun to try and tell stories. And there's no book, none of the books that I've published, none of them were ever written like to make money, or how can I do the formula, how can I score. You know what I mean?
In New York for another meeting with the Greek director, Kostagavras, on our new script, The Magic City, an original. It's about science and human values in the 20th century. On my 1981 book tour, I fly to Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area again, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Austin, Dallas, Chicago. Up high, I'm terrified of even modest turbulence. Once I grabbed the hand of a guy sitting next to me, and although startled, he let me hold his hand and the plane landed safely. I apologized profusely. He replied, "No problem."
All the books they're just my little flights of fancy that in the end I was lucky to publish, that someone wanted to publish them too. But they're never projects that, took money up front or that sort of thing, or I always desperately wrote the stories, sort of trying to earn a living, but I never wrote the stories that you would gear up to write in order to deliberately earn a living. How I earned a living for 20 years is working on films.
You think the Milagro Beanfield War is the book that you're going to be the most remembered for?
After so much work and so many screenplays and so many drafts and just so much, hooky-mooky kerfuffle, the end result is it's friendly, it's a loving film, it's on the right side. I don't think it's going to bowl you over by being a great film, but it's not going to make you sick to your stomach by being a terrible film. And it has a lot of nice moments in it. It's fractured. It's very fractured. I think there was so much chaos involved with it that it's surprising that it turned out to be as sort of friendly as it is.
Do you think that's the book and the film that you're going to be the most remembered for?
No, I think it'll be Redford's movie. I don't think I have anything to do with it. I think the fact that it was made into a movie by Redford, that it's all Redford's thing. I'm simply a footnote on his coattails. I think once the movie came out, nobody ever read the book again. It's I don't know. I hope not. But you should be grateful to be remembered for anything.
I think the best way to introduce you to the group is to call out the group's historian, Mr. John Nichols.
Rick Smith, Sean Murphy, and yours truly, Johnny Nichols. Began Los Muchachos in la Biblioteca on Wednesday, January 10th, 2007 in the back of Brodsky Bookshop on the main drag of Taos, just a block south of Michael's Kitchen. We three understood that we were in a libreria, not a biblioteca, but the screwed up name seemed very appropriate to the quality of music that followed. And so far we've never played a Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Van Morrison, Joni Mitchell, Emmylou Harris, or Billie Holiday song correctly. In fact, we've happily butchered all music that we played with untrammeled delight. We play everything in the key of X, but we've sure had a lot of fun. No practice allowed, no public performances, we swore, no spectators have ever witnessed our enthusiastic cacophonies. Right from the start, we promised never to perform.
We're going to kick it off with Mr. John Nichols.
Okay, let's kick it off. It's just a little something I picked up in England. Chairman Johnny Nichols. Rock and roll.
Everybody. I don't mean just my fellow rat pack up here. I mean everybody. That means you, Violet. That means you, Bella. Whenever you hear those familiar words coming around to these jugglers and say, we're gonna play down by burdens, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay my burdens down by the riverside and study. Oh, no,
Louisiana, left to New Orleans, back up in the woods among the evergreens.